Okay, so I'm supposed to be giving the sort of summing up, which is quite a challenging thing, and not least of which because you're all going to be going, well, it's kind of over now, so let's go. So I just want to have some closing thoughts, obviously, but also to have some, if you like, promotional moments for the Genetic Society. So it's been a real eye-opener seeing the proceedings today, because they actually impinge on some of the things that we've been thinking about in the Genetic Society in terms of the public engagement. And we've also been looking at how COVID has affected both the ability to deliver public engagement, but also how it's created opportunities. So just briefly, who am I? I work on this beastie here. This is C. elegans. So I work on nematodes, and I work here at the University of Aberdeen. So I both teach extensively on genetics and I run a research lab. But I also have built up over the years, I don't think you'd call it dignify it with a portfolio. I've opportunistically done public engagement at various levels. So I've done conventional public engagement, where I'm reaching out to an audience and talking about science in a conventional sort of way. So the standard sort of lecture. But I've also done more, what you would call them, eccentric. I've started off doing Bright Club, doing what might pass as comedy. And then that sort of transformed into a couple of things at the Edinburgh Fringe with the Cabaret of Dangerous Ideas. I've also been the genetics consultant for the Science of Game of Thrones, and then finally ended up on a podcast panel game show called Do the Right Thing, where I was the worm expert. So I'm quite passionate about public engagement, and I think there are lots of ways in which we can reach out. I mean, as the talks this afternoon emphasized, there are ways in which we can reach out and capture people that are not necessarily usually the target for these audiences. I'm very much aware when we design public engagement exercises, we're often targeting a fairly narrow range of the public. And I think we can probably do better than that. And we're going to hear more, I think, tomorrow as well about how we can do that. So this is not just a plug for the Genetic Society. What we're looking at here is the fact that the Genetic Society we are not always well known, I think, amongst the scientific societies. And that's quite surprising, I think, because our membership costs are relatively modest. And what you get out of that is quite substantial. So these are all the things that you can get out of that as at different levels in science. Obviously, some of these are more focused on research, but what I want to focus on particularly is our engagement, our public engagement grants and our science communication. So first of all, I run a Communicating Your Science workshop. We've been running it now since 2013. It was originally started by Professor Enrico Cohen when he was the president of the Genetic Society. And we run it at this beautiful location, Chicheley Hall, near Milton Keynes. And it's for early career scientists, so PhD students and early career postdocs. And the aim is to get you thinking. You come away, all expenses paid by the Genetic Society. It's limited to 20 participants. And we run it over 3 days, and we give you exposure to sort of science storytelling, stand-up comedians. So this is Helen Keane here, who is a proper stand-up comedian, not a pretend person like me. And she teaches the students, in fact, she's teaching the students here to present a 5-minute comedy show based on their science. So this is quite a challenging exercise, but all of the students that that have been through this say it was a really valuable exercise in thinking about how you can communicate what you do and how to communicate science in a different way. We also greatly helped by First Create the Media. So that's a team of scientific and professional public engagers in science. And they come together and do all sorts of different things on the final day, including podcasting, creation of YouTubes, and so forth. So it's a slightly different sort of communication workshop. It's very much an emphasis on practical skills. And I would recommend that you apply. This is the link at the bottom here. I don't know of any other workshops that have the same sort of slant that we have, and obviously we have limited numbers as well, so we're usually oversubscribed, but we had a hiatus over the last 2 years, obviously for obvious reasons, but we are going back to Chichley Hall in 2022. So we hold it in April, the end of April every year. So I urge you to apply. Your research needs to be in the field of genetics, but loosely in the field of genetics. So I realize that some of you may not all be eligible to apply. And then we also run public engagement grants. So these are grants that are specifically targeted for an idea that you might have. We have broken it down into 2 activities. So obviously smaller activities costing up to £1,000. And then we have tier 2, which is these larger activities that go up from about £1,000 to £5,000. We have 2 deadlines a year for those. Small and large are fairly vague terms. We can discuss about what that means. Effectively, we would suggest that you get in touch with us if you've got an idea, and we can give you advice about which grants to go for. Okay, so no talk about the public engagement for the Genetics Society would be complete without mention of Christina. So Christina is here in the audience. She is our head of engagement and communications. She was originally recruited because in 2019, it was at the Society's centenary, and we built up, or rather she built up, in collaboration with the committee, a whole range of events, including going to the Chelsea Flower Show. So we had a garden at the Chelsea Flower Show. We've been to the Green Man Festival and various other celebration events. Christina then stayed on, in part because there were legacy elements associated with the centenary celebration, but also because we wanted to create something that would be more long-lasting in the light of the centenary, and that created that brought forward our survey of the public understanding and trust in genetics. So this was a randomly selected group of about 2,000 participants, run by a professional survey company. We're in the process of writing this work up. So we have some clear take-home messages that come out of this survey. Interestingly, some of the questions that we targeted were targeted on things to do with COVID. So for instance, people's perceptions of viruses, virus evolution, and the genetic tests, or rather the molecular biology tests used to detect the virus. So we're just working that up, and there will be press releases associated with that sort of imminently, as it were. But one thing that's worth sharing in the light of what we've been talking about today, in fact, what we've been talking about for the whole thing, one of the key take-home messages, I think there were 3 main take-home messages that we obtained from this survey. One of the key messages is the public really wants more science, and we have definitive evidence to show this. Okay, so the majority of our respondents felt that there wasn't enough science in the public sphere. So this is good news for us, right? the public has an appetite for science, for science stories, for engaging with scientists, and they want scientists or people associated with science to be the ones that deliver that. Okay, and there'll be more about that. I can't talk any more about that until we've actually worked this stuff up. Okay, so I want to wrap up because I don't want to go ramble on for too long. It seems to me that there is the take-home messages that we've come from today. The first one is really obvious. COVID-19 significantly impacted both our ability to give engagement activities. It reduced them substantially, and it changed them. And so it impacted the quality. It didn't necessarily make them it changed the quality of them. What I mean by quality, it changed them in qualitative ways. It didn't necessarily make them worse, but it meant that they were different. Now, those are challenges, right? And possibly in some of those are some negative elements. But I think it also created opportunities. So it created opportunity to explore new ways to engage with communities. It means that we now, a lot of us now are familiar with and have access to the technology that allows us to engage remotely. I know working at a university, that's changed the way that we can teach. So some aspects of that. So the idea of providing lecture recordings, which come complete with captions. So all of my words captioned. That's had a huge impact on my students. They all want us to continue to do this, particularly for students for whom English isn't their first language. So that's been a general boon within the university, and I'm sure similar things will be occurring in the public engagement. But I think it's also because the public have been directly affected by specific aspects of science, which has also been talked about today. So immunology and virology. Some of the questions we had in our survey talk about molecular biology and their understanding of evolutionary biology. So for instance, it should be clear from the way that the pandemic has progressed that viruses evolve. Okay, they evolve in response to selective pressure, that selective pressure being immune system amongst various other things. So it creates this opportunity to engage with the public in a way that they can clearly see is much more meaningful than it might have been. Okay, so I will stop there. There probably aren't going to be many questions because you're all going to be exhausted, but if there are any questions, I can take them. And I just want to thank everybody for their presentations today. It's been a really interesting and wide-ranging set of talks. I've scribbled down on my pad a whole load of things that are going to make a difference for me in my role as the Vice President for Public Understanding of Genetics at the Genetic Society. So thank you all for that. And thank you for the organizers for creating this opportunity.